What's up everyone, it's a knife here, and today I'm going to be doing my first impressions on my newest knife and my very first Hinderer. This is the Hinderer Firetac. And this is the Generation 2 Firetac, and this has the recurved blade. It is on the tri-way pivot system, and it has the steel lock bar insert. The first generation also had the steel lock bar insert. But yeah, this recently came out, I think it was earlier this year, or maybe it was in 2020. So they're not in stock anymore, but I don't think they're in stock anymore, and they're not really hard to find on the secondary, so it shouldn't be that much of an issue picking one up. I got this on the secondary for, I think it was $375, which retail is $425, so I was happy with the price that I got it at. But the reason I chose this over the XM18 was, I guess it's for reasons I'll talk about a little bit later, but I just like the simplicity of this. It's a much more neutral design, and I feel like while still being overbuilt and have like a thick stock and stuff, it is still a little bit more useful for EDC than the XM18. So yeah, that's why I got the Firetac first. But let's talk about the anatomy of this knife, what makes it up. We got a 20 CV blade. This is just kind of a drop point blade shape with that recurve in there like I mentioned. I got the stonewash blade and the stonewash lock side on here with the blue G10 scale. It's got titanium hardware. I believe the size of this hardware is 5/64, and all hardware is made in-house. Really nice hardware. I like this. That's one thing that Hinderer does really good. You know, a bunch of people talk about that a ton. It doesn't mean a whole lot to me because I'm not someone who takes their knives apart all the time, but it still is nice, a little nice attention to detail part of Hinderer's right there. It's a frame lock made in the USA by Rick Hinderer Knives. And yeah, that's about all I got. It's a right-handed knife. Pocket clip is tip up and tip down right-handed. No options for the lefties out there. Sorry about that, lefties, but I don't really care. But yeah, now let's move on to the looks of this knife. So overall, it looks great. It's just the design, the overall lines of this knife is one of those timeless designs that people like to say, you know, this recurve is a little bit different, but still just super simple, very similar looking to a drop point Sabenza. This is an Insingo, so it's kind of hard to tell. But a lot of people call the Firetac the Hinderer Sabenza, or not really, but they're very similar to each other. So I will be doing a comparison video once I get more use on this Firetac. So I feel like that will be pretty fun. The G10, I like this little milling pattern in here. It looks good. Blue isn't my favorite color, and I feel like it kind of makes the knife look cheaper for how expensive it is. But honestly, I'm fine with it, and there are tons of aftermarket scale options out there, so that's one nice thing about Hinderers. You can really customize them to your liking. I'd like to maybe get a black micarta scale on this and kind of match my Sabenza, but I don't know. I'll probably say that, or I'll say that now, and then it'll be like 6 months later, and I'll still have this blue scale on it, just because I'm not really picky about how my knives look. But I'm a big fan of the stonewash finish. It's kind of polished, but the scratches from the media on here are very coarse, and I think that looks good. Same with the stonewash on the titanium, and the pocket clip is also stonewashed. Overall, this is probably my favorite configuration that you can get. I think the working finish is good too. That's like a blasted finish with a stonewash over top of it, but that does show wear more than a normal stonewash would, even though it's called the working finish. It's kind of a confusing description of the finish, but still, stonewash handle, stonewash titanium, I think that it looks great. Now, let's talk about the blade on this. So, 20 CV as a steel. One interesting thing that I've noticed recently in the knife community is how many people are figuring out, yeah, M390 20 CV, this stuff isn't really consistently good. Now, for this one, I have noticed that this is good. I mean, I've sharpened it once, I've honed it once, and stropped it once. That one time I honed it, and one time that I sharpened it, and it's felt really good for 20 CV. You know, I've had good 20 CV, the bad 20 CV, and then somewhere in the middle. So I've had a lot of examples of this, and this seems to be one of the better ones that I've owned. It doesn't seem like it's the best 20 CV ever. I assume that like 62 HRC is when it gets really, really good and when you kind of maximize the potential of it. I don't know if it's hitting 62, but it definitely is a good heat treat on this. It deburred nicely, and so far I've noticed that the edge retention, it's been what I have expected. You know, it hasn't really dulled very fast at all, and so I really like that about it. Let's get a thickness behind the edge measurement on this knife. And I think Hinderer usually does a good job with their 20 CV, but one thing about the whole M390 family of steels is it's kind of hard to consistently do a good job with it unless you're like a custom maker, which I mean, I'm not trying to say heat treating is easy for custom makers. They just can pay attention a little bit more. So thickness behind the edge right on the dot at 20 thousandths. That was kind of like in the middle of the recurve there. And then towards the very base where it kind of sweeps back up, we're looking 20, right under 20 thousandths, 19 and a half thousandths. And then this thickens up at the tip. Actually, does it thicken up? I wasn't behind that bevel there. Thickens up at the tip at about 25 thousandths. So pretty average grind. I'm actually really happy with that because, you know, sometimes Hinderers with those XM18s with the regular size stock thickness, they get really thick, like 25 thousandths behind the edge, and that is pushing it a little bit too much for me. The blade stock thickness is about 130 thousandths, we'll just call it around there. So pretty, or a little bit thicker than average, I would say, on the stock, but 20 thousandths behind the edge, that's what a lot of my Spydercos are. And even though I would like to see this knife 15 thousandths behind the edge, maybe 10 thousandths behind the edge, I can still work with 20 thousandths. So that's something that I'm really happy with. And that's going to make me use this knife a whole lot more. And so yeah, I never really felt using this knife for the EDC tasks I've done so far. I've never felt like I've needed a slicier blade. Don't really like saying slicier, but I don't feel like I've ever been in need of a thinner blade to get better cutting performance. Overall, I have been really impressed with it. Talking about this recurve, a lot of you guys are probably curious on my thoughts on this because I don't think I've ever had a recurved folding knife, especially not in this price range, because a lot of times I stay away from them just because they are more difficult to sharpen. But honestly, sharpening this, it wasn't fun to sharpen. It's not like a regular knife where I can just bring this to a sharpening stone and go like that and sharpen it normally. I had to work off the corner of one of my sharpening stones to form that initial burr. It was a coarser stone, but after that, I'm pretty much set on finer stones, refining this edge. Because I have ceramic stones that work for this. I guess my only nitpick would be I don't have anything like that are diamonds or like a diamond bonded stone that can sharpen this up to a finer grit. So I wish that I did, but still ceramics, kind of polishing this edge up a little bit more on 20 CV. I'm fine with doing that. So overall sharpening, it's not fun to do, but it is definitely doable. If you have a sharp maker, you're all set. You can sharpen this very easy. And there's a lot, if you are skilled with freehand sharpening, if you know how to do it, there's a good chance you can make something work if you have a recurve on your knife. Now for using the recurve, I have absolutely loved using this thing. It has really impressed me a whole lot more than I thought it would. It's just so good at cutting. And a lot of people have always said, okay, karambits are actually pretty good in EDC use because a karambit is pretty much just one big recurve with no belly out at the end. And I know I don't really do karambits, but it does make sense because the material will kind of be hooked in to this cutting edge. And I've noticed that exact same thing with this recurve right here. A lot of times if I'm cutting, you know, for example, cardboard or something, it will get like right in this area where my finger is and then just stay in there, and really you get a ton of power behind that cut because it's trying to move up towards the blade when your hand is moving in this direction, but that's almost hooking it in where it can't, and that's generating a lot of power, and it's just a really good cutter. It makes it feel like it cuts a lot better than a knife with thick stock and 20 thousandths behind the edge. And so yeah, I'm a really big fan of this recurve. One grip that I think is a really underrated grip with this knife is this reverse grip right here, and maybe you're cutting like cord or something, you can wrap that in the recurve and just get a whole lot of power behind that cut. Just a super nice blade shape, one that has really surprised me so far. So I guess I might be a fan of recurves. I don't know. Still, I wouldn't want every single knife I own to be a recurve just because I do sharpen knives a decent amount and it could get kind of tedious over time. But still using this has been a joy to use, and I really am a fan of this blade shape. Quick note on the sharpening shoulder, they did a decent job on there. You can take this thumb disc out when you sharpen, so I'm not taking it like this where I could have more of a risk of sharpening in a smile, but I haven't experienced anything yet. Maybe in the future after a whole lot of sharpenings, I'll have to cut in a choil, but pretty good. Usually on Hinderer knives, they have a choil, so you don't have to worry about that plunge grind all too much, but still not a bad sharpening choil on there. For the fit and finish and lockup, this is where it doesn't get bad, but it separates them from Chris Reeve knives, how I still feel like Chris Reeve knives are on top with their quality. Let's talk about the finishing on this. So the G10, it's finished pretty good. I do like the texture on it right here. It is a little bit rougher, as you would probably guess, in this little designed patch right here. But one thing I wish they would have done is put a larger chamfer going across here, because you can still feel some of that grip, and that's going on the end of your fingers when you're holding this, which just makes it a little bit more uncomfortable. I kind of wish that it was like this. You see how there's a separation from the regular G10 in this milled part up here. I wish it was kind of like that on the bottom too. That would just make it a little less, it's not sharp to where it's painful, but just it will rough up your hands over time, which I guess I'm sounding like my hands are weak. It hasn't been an issue yet, but it's just a plausible issue in the future. Also, the inside on this titanium, the corner is broken on the inside, so I'm not trying to complain about that. But on a lot of knives, they are chamfered on the inside of the G10. I'm trying to find an example of one, and I don't know where it is. Okay, here it is. American Blade Works Model 1V6. You see that chamfer on the inside of this micarta? That makes this just not feel like anything, or it's very, very comfortable. There is no pinching when the fat of your fingers gets in there, and that's just a little bit more of an attention to detail, almost quality of life improvement. It's not make or break, but still I wish they would have done a larger chamfer on the inside of these titanium scales. And that's about it that I have with the finishing. For the fitment of this knife, this is where it gets a little bit bad. So blade play, no issues with blade play at all. But one of my issues is with the tri-way pivot system, and I have a first-hand example on how the tri-way isn't really as good as a lot of people praise it to be. So here's my issue. I got this knife, and one of the first things I did was try to switch it to Teflon washers. Here is the bag with the washers in it, and the reason that I wanted to use Teflon is pretty simple. It's self-lubricating. Pretty much after I take the knife apart, put it back together with Teflon in it, if it is good to go, there's a good chance I'm not going to have to take this knife apart for the rest of its life unless I want to, maybe put some more oil on there in specific spots or put a new scale on there. So that's why I wanted to use Teflon. Also, Teflon is like buttery smooth when it breaks in, so that's why I wanted to do it. But after I put Teflon on, after probably 20 to 30 openings just to see if it was good, I noticed I was hearing a noise of rubbing. So you see that little circular scratch right there, right above the titanium scale? Kind of hard for me to show up, but that is from rubbing against the titanium on those Teflon washers, because this knife, the tolerances aren't properly tuned for using the Teflon washers. Now, I didn't try phosphor bronze because I was like, it worked for bearings. I'm just going to stick with bearings because I don't care all that much. But still, it just shows you that the tri-way pivot, it's just pivot tolerances are hard to get right with one knife, and to get right with 3 different kinds of pivot tolerances, that makes it even more complicated. And a lot of times we'll see that when you actually switch them out, it doesn't work. Now, I guess I could keep the Teflon in and just have it rub for the rest of my life. Oh, one thing I want to say, when the Teflon was in, there was no blade play on the knife. So that was how I would normally adjust it. And it wasn't like I had it over tightened or way too loose where it would rub. So it's just the tri-way. A lot of people praise it so much, and I feel like it's almost fake praise, because so many of those people who praise it so much are the people who got it with bearings, still have bearings in it, and don't really care about switching it out. And so that is just kind of my issues with it. I honestly wish that I could have got a Gen 1 Firetac with the regular Teflon washers where it's tuned how it should be from the factory. But I wouldn't be able to try out the Recurve, and they are very hard to find right now. So it's one of those things where it's not that big of a deal that I'm using bearings, but it is a little bit of a bummer that the tri-way pivot isn't really what a ton of people talk it up to be. One more thing on the lockup of this knife. The lockup isn't bad. This knife isn't going to fail on me, but I wouldn't say this is as good as Chris Reeve knives, because with these steel inserts on knives, a lot of times there tends to be lock slip. And one thing that Hinderer, that they have been doing on these newer knives with these steel inserts and the tri-ways that I feel like that I'm not a big fan of is light lock bar pressure. So one way to check lock bar pressure is just how fast, I guess, the knife drops shut when you are closing it and not pressing the lock bar over. You see it drops pretty good when I am pressing the lock bar over, and when I'm not holding the lock bar at all, it's already fallen over. So there's not much lock pressure at all, or lock bar pressure at all. Let me compare that to the Sebenza. You open it up, flick it out like that. It drops to my thumb like that, but it's not dropping shut at all because it uses strong lock bar pressure. And one thing you'll notice is there is no lock slip with the Sebenza. I can push on that and there's no stick at all. It's just normal like it should be. With the steel insert, I can push it over like this and then, oh wow, I pushed that far over. You hear that lock stick right there. Because that was really pushed over far, because there is not as good of a contact between the steel on steel than there is with the carburized titanium on the steel, and it's really just the geometry of the lock face that changes it. I just turned on my scale over there. But that is the reason why I think Chris Reeve knives with the carburization of the lock face, you know, ceramic detent ball, I still think is better than this one. It's just, I feel like with this, it is promoting drop shut action over strength, and I don't think that is what Hinderers are made for. It's not going to bother me all that much, so that is why I'm not making it as much of a deal. But still, I just wish it was a little bit better. I wish it was fixed. And you guys have probably seen videos of knives of Hinderers with these steel inserts being lightly spine whacked and failing. I have tried that with this one. It's not budging, so that's why it's not that big of a problem to me, but it could be better, and so that is why I'm nitpicking about it. Let's move on. Sorry I talked about that so much. For the ergonomics of this knife, the ergos are really, really good, and yeah, they're just very simple in the lines. There is no big finger grooves or anything, so you can hold it like this, like this, like this, really any way that you want to hold it, any grip that you have to do, this knife is probably going to be comfortable for you. Also, if you have really big hands, this knife is for you. I'd say I probably wear large size gloves, but my fingers are thinner than probably a lot of other knife guys out there. And gripping it as tight as I can with all my fingers up, I could probably fit 2 more pinkies on there. So if you have ham hands, this knife could be the one, or probably is going to fit your hands nicely and be comfortable because it's so simple. So I really like that. This pocket clip does not give a hot spot at all, and you have a pretty straight spine on this handle. And so all the pressure of your cut is being evenly distributed throughout your hand, like in here, I would say. And so that is really nice. I'm a big fan of that. The ergonomics on this knife are great. The only quality of life issue that I would like I pointed out earlier, is just maybe another chamfer on the inside of these titanium handles. Now let's talk about the carry of this. So let me get a weight on here. The weight is good. We're looking 4.1 ounces. That is a fine weight for me. I'm not someone who really stresses on weight too much, unless it's just like 6 or 7 ounces. Then I'm like, okay, that's a little bit much for me. But yeah, 4 ounces is nice. Carries in lightweight clothes that I wear. Have no issues with this, so that's good. The pocket clip is great. Hinderer does a great job with clips. And it has good retention, slides in and out of the pocket very nicely. I have a little bit to grab onto here, so that is nice. And overall, really great clip. Good job. You can carry it tip up or tip down, whichever you prefer. I have it tip up because that's just kind of what I'm used to. And yeah, so carry overall is good. For the action is really good on this. If you're someone who likes to play with your knives, this knife is one for you. It drops to my thumb and it drops close due to that weak lock bar pressure. And I'll be honest, it is fun to play with, and I have been playing with it, but I would rather see something like the Sabenza where you can still flick it out. It drops to your finger, but it doesn't do that, and you just close it like this. I'd rather see something like this promoting strength over fun factor than something like this, but still, I gotta give credit where credit's due. This action is good and fun to play with. If you're curious about my thoughts about the thumb disc, overall it works. I'm happy with it. I probably prefer a thumb stud, but still no issues with the thumb disc. I guess it could get in the way of cutting material. I've never really had that happen, and you can remove it when you go to sharpen, so I'm happy with that. Overall, the action, it's really good on this. For the value of this knife, $425, I think that's a good value. Buying it new, I would buy this new if I could have, or yeah, I think I got a good deal on the secondary market, and I think that as a new knife at $425 is still a good deal. Just very overbuilt, nice hardware, really cool standoffs that is just really beefy, thick titanium. It's like almost, some people might look at this and think it's like a gentleman knife, but no, very thick, very beefy, going to last you, be a good hard use knife if you want to use it for that. And I really like almost everything about this blade. I wish it was ground thinner, and I wish they used a different steel for more consistency with heat treats, but I got a good one, so I'm happy with that. But yeah, that's about all I got for this video. Thanks for watching. Sorry that it went a little bit long. I'm going to keep carrying this knife and hopefully do a review on it, and then do some of my comparison videos that I want to do. But yeah, that's all I got for today. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys in the next one.